Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Amicable Divorce Network podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Ann Moore-Grant. I am the founder of the Amicable Divorce Network and your host for this podcast. And if you've been following along, you know that season 2 is following chapter by chapter by chapter through our book, Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution. This book is designed to be a step-by-step timeline approach to your divorce, teaching you about the divorce process as well as how you can best prepare for your divorce and get it resolved outside of the court system. It is available on Amazon and it's called Divorce Amicably, Your Roadmap to Resolution. And we have made it all the way to chapter 50, so thank you for staying with us. Today I am joined by Traci Weiss, and she is a Georgia attorney and guardian ad litem with Weiss Family Law in Atlanta, and she has written about the marital balance sheet, which is a very important part of your divorce, your negotiations, and should not be overlooked. Thank you for joining me, Traci.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
I think you've been practicing as long as I have, and jump in and just tell everybody what is so important. Why did you choose to write about the marital balance sheet?
Well, for a divorce case, it's really the most important step. And I think it's the scariest step, but it's the one that helps people to get the best understanding of how it works and how they can be okay. I think the fear of the unknown is the hardest thing about a divorce case of, what's going to happen? Where am I going to live? Am I going to be able to afford to stay in my house? How am I going to pay my bills? All of that. What will the takeaway be? And so preparing the marital balance sheet, which is also kind of what I call the cheat sheet for the lawyers, helps kind of take all that information, organize it, and then pare it down into usually about one spreadsheet, an 8.5 by 11 spreadsheet that helps.
That's in landscape.
On rare occasions.
Yeah.
Usually, I have color-coded columns that kind of help make everything easier to see, and it helps to get everybody on the same page a little bit better, whether it's before mediation or in mediation. There's people don't always know what they don't know yet, right? So each side has to go through discovery, whether it's, if it's through the Amicable Divorce Network, thankfully, usually that's a less formal process. Usually that can be done by agreement of, okay, we're going to exchange X number of months worth of documents, bank statements, credit card statements, retirement account statements, anything, loans against the house, mortgage statements, things like that. And each side will, panic of, well, I don't have all the information.
Yeah.
And so, okay, as long as you provide what you have and the other side provides what they have, and both lawyers involved get a chance to look at all of it, then we can help pare it down into the marital balance sheet and figure out what is there now.
Yeah.
And what do we do with it?
Exactly. I mean, that's like the whole thing is identify it and then, divide it up. I think it's important just to note here, if you've been reading the book, you know that in amicable cases, we use a computer program called Detour Life. And if you sync your accounts with the system, that means you usually don't have to produce paper discovery. It pulls a 3-year transaction history, and then you don't have to go through all those PDFs. So that's another time-saving and efficient way to handle an amicable case that we use. Everybody can log in and look at the same information, and it really saves a lot of time and helps you get to the marital balance sheet, which is a summary of all of your assets and all of your debts in one sheet, which sometimes you're really not ready to settle a case until both parties have that same marital balance sheet. If they don't, there's a dispute.
I think it's important to note also, so Georgia is an equitable distribution state. And so if you're not using Detour Life, if you're doing it manually, it needs to be updated.
Every day.
Periodically.
Yeah.
It needs to be updated when you're trying to negotiate or when you are going to mediation or going to trial, if you end up having to go to a trial, because the values change and fluctuate throughout the litigation, if there's litigation. And if somebody has their statements from August and somebody else has their statements from February, and they're comparing each other's assets to see if we keep what's in, if one party keeps what's in their name and the other party keeps what's in their name, how far off are the values, and how do we get them to something that's more equitable? you're not comparing apples to apples in that way.
Yeah.
So like a community property state would not have that same issue.
Mm-hmm.
But for us, it's really important to try and figure out a demarcation point.
Right.
Sometimes before mediation, both sides can agree, like, let's get
Mm-hmm.
everything as of this date.
Yeah, I would say as a mediator, that's the number one thing I see that people haven't decided. And I mediate not just amicable cases, but high conflict cases in the court system as well. And even if each attorney is organized and they have their marital balance sheet, which is rare. So if you're going through a divorce, make sure that you're working on that before your mediation. But they've done them for different days. And so somebody's done one for March 1st, somebody's done one for April 15th. And so everybody should agree on what we call the valuation date and do that prior to mediation, because a lot of times in the mediation itself, where there's two attorneys in Georgia, the attorneys attend the mediation, so it's a little unusual. But if there's two attorneys and a mediator, sometimes we hit the pause button for one party to update their information to the same date as the other party, and you're paying people to do that in real time. So that's something I think to approach before your mediation, because if you were in court, the judge would say, what's yesterday's balance, what's this morning's balance, and everybody's prepared for that. But in mediation, it can vary greatly what day people are using, and the stock market is wild, crypto is wild, so you want to have that date set. That's a big tip.
I think it's also helpful to organize the marital balance sheet in a way that kind of groups like items.
Mm-hmm.
So, liquid bank accounts, checking, savings, money market, those sorts of things that are relatively stable. I usually keep those in one section together, and then
Mm-hmm.
retirement accounts, which might have a different tax effect on
Mm-hmm.
them. So in today's dollars, they might be worth a little bit different than what it shows on the actual statement value. But if you're balancing out a 401k against a 401k, at least those are like accounts and they're going to have similar tax effects.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're trying to offset a 401k against a cash account,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to have different values. And if you don't have a financial expert there to help explain in a way
Yeah.
that is not just one attorney arguing against the other about
Mm-hmm.
it, it's going to be harder to come to an agreement on some of those values and how they work together.
Yeah.
I usually color code things too. So,
Mm-hmm.
Easiest, more stereotypical way to do it is if it's a husband and a wife, I'll have a blue column for the husbands and a pink column for the wives of what's in their name.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately what each one would take away. And then if there's separate property claims, if somebody has something that they brought into the marriage and kept separate, or they inherited something or received something as a gift that has not been commingled with marital assets, hasn't been put into a joint account, I usually have the green column for the
Mm-hmm.
husband's separate property claims and the yellow column for the wife's separate property claims. So it's kind of easy to visualize and to point out to people instead of going, okay, on line 18, column J,
Mm-hmm.
let's just look here and, look at the yellow column down in this section. Can we
Yeah.
agree on this?
Yeah. And in Detour Life, it's organized very similarly, and it will gray out separate properties so that people can see that it exists. Somebody has, let's say they're doing really well, they got $1 million in inheritance, but it isn't going to be in those numbers when you adjust the columns for settlement. It will just be there so everybody knows that it's happening. And I think one of the hardest things that people really don't get is that each party should have the same marital balance sheet, same information, same values before they start negotiating, because maybe there's a business, or I'm sure you and I see this both all of the time. People have different values on the house.
Right.
And somebody's gone on Zillow, somebody hasn't, somebody's factored in, a new air conditioner or something like that. And I would say it's important to definitely be exchanging these marital balance sheets prior to mediation so you can sort out where the differences are prior to negotiation, because any of these issues are easy to sort out. I mean, you can get an appraisal on the house, you can pull a current statement, but if you get to mediation, you're arguing about the Zillow value of the house, you're not going to be able to resolve that issue that day. So you haven't prepared 100% for resolution.
In Georgia, everybody's required, if they're a party to a divorce, they're required to complete a domestic relations financial affidavit. And as part of that, there's a net worth statement section, which is what I use for my clients to build the marital balance sheet. And I'll always tell them, put in placeholders. If you know
Yeah.
that there's something that needs to be figured out, put in unknown, put in a question mark, so we at least know those are the things we have to revisit and we have to get to the bottom of. If it's the fair market value of the house, you know what the mortgage is, put the amount that's owed on it. If there's a HELOC, put that in there. And then for the fair market value, if we put a placeholder there, at least we can maybe talk with the other side ahead of time and say, do we need to get an appraisal? Or if each party puts on their financial affidavit of what the fair market value is, if the numbers are close, at least you can go into mediation and say, you know what, we're willing to use your number as long as we can agree, on how we're going to handle these other things without having the expense of an appraisal. But yeah, you can spend a lot of time for 3 different lawyers' rates during mediation to talk about those things if you don't figure them out ahead of time.
Exactly. It's very efficient just to make sure you're walking in with the same set of facts, and mediation really is then pulling apart those facts. It isn't a fact-finding mission. It really is, we got the same facts and now we're figuring out how to divide them up. You brought up a really interesting point earlier that I think people don't understand often, and I see this all the time when people DIY their divorce, and that is that not all assets are created equal. I will be very upfront in saying I'm not the person, I'm not a financial expert, I'm not the person to tell you that what the values are that are different. 1K versus cash, easiest example. But we do have people that can give that information and help and are in the network that can give that information. Will you talk about those professionals a little bit?
Yeah, there are certified amicable divorce professionals, there are certified financial divorce professionals, there are certified divorce lending professionals, and there are all sorts of people, and I think the book is actually really helpful with that, where people can look through if they have a question about those sorts of things and have experts in those fields who actually address those specific topics. There are forensic accountants that can help with figuring out separate property or business valuations or things like that. One thing that I love about the Amicable Divorce Network, and I have another case right now that we're about to do this in, is instead of doing it the more old-fashioned and expensive way, is, each side gets their own expert to try and do the valuation of the business, and then each side is arguing about whose expert is right versus agreeing jointly, let's use somebody
as a neutral, as a professional to help us both,
Right. Let's use somebody together who both sides trust to be fair and impartial about the valuation, so whatever they come up with, everybody's on the same page with using. And there might be variables that each side can argue about, well, but what if this, what if that? It doesn't mean that, your lawyer stops advocating for you, but it's the helpful thing too is that with the network, I know that if we use somebody that is in the network, it's somebody that is resolution minded and is not going to try to blow things up into a battle that's not necessary, where there are sometimes on rare occasions an expert that
I'm thinking of one right now. I'm thinking that is not in the network. I'm thinking of one right now that I hate working with that's very confrontational. And they're a financial expert. And so it's important to work with a team of professionals that are sharing in your desire to get things over with. And when they're working as a financial neutral, everybody can ask questions, everybody can submit documents. Sometimes we even have a meeting with everybody when they give their report, ask questions in real time. Did you consider this? How heavily did you weigh this? And nobody's hiding the ball. It is, have a really free flow conversation, and they are coming up with their best valuation for the situation to get it resolved and, to give everybody the same information. Right. And so then you're not paying the same type of expert to do the work twice. In a case, it's one neutral working for everybody. It is an incredible savings in money and time.
Right. And as far as hiding the ball, each side is entitled to information. And if you have information about the assets or the debts that are part of the marital estate, if you were to try to go to court, you would have to share that information. So you may as well share it up front. Be open, be honest about it. One, it helps build trust in the other side that you're not hiding something. And I think, when people are going through a divorce, oftentimes there's already a trust issue. Right. But if somebody can say, look, I'm giving you everything, it's an open book, have at it, I've got nothing to hide here. I think that helps people to be able to trust in the process and negotiate in good faith. And if they're going to play games about providing the evidence that they have access to, the documents that they have access to. It's going to cost more. It's going to make things more acrimonious. If you're going through litigation and you've got formal discovery, then you end up with motions to compel discovery and possibly having to go in front of the judge for the first time to explain why you haven't given your documents.
Yeah.
Is that who you want to go in front of again later on to decide your case? No.
Yeah, and an unusual thing that happens is, when you're doing discovery the old-fashioned way, saying, hey, John Smith, give me all your bank records and all of this, it's, he's having to download from the internet to PDFs. It's passing through his hands and computer, and as we often are missing page 3 or we're missing the September statement, and it could be inadvertent or not. But when it's synced with Detour, it's coming directly from the bank. So, it didn't pass through anybody's hands. You can sort it, you can look at it. And I have, 2 amicable cases right now that involve business valuations. And we just added our business valuation expert to Detour. The other side can see the information. So the client's also not producing replicas and duplicate information. So everybody's seeing the same thing. So, I think that's what everybody thinks happens in court, that, they're going to give us everything, but they don't understand. It's a PDF that somebody's sitting there going through with a calculator to try to figure out. So there are some better ways to go about that to really be truly transparent and get to the heart of the matter to get things resolved.
And not everybody is comfortable downloading all those documents too and knowing what to do with them. I still get times where people are struggling and they're taking a picture of each page of the bank statement that comes in the mail, and then they're emailing them to me one page at a time.
I got that the other day. I'm like, I can't do anything with a picture of the document.
Well, I can.
Oh, you can? I'll send them your way.
I'll make it work. However, people, sometimes they still bring me a box of documents and, all their bank statements and stuff. And, however we need to make it work, the bottom line is we need that information, and the other side is entitled to that information so that we can build the balance sheet. And the balance sheet is what is needed in order to divide any of the assets, any of the debts of the marriage. So, and that is usually one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle. I mean, if you have a child custody situation or something like that, sometimes those issues are more complicated and take longer to resolve. And a lot of times I'll deal with those issues first before we deal with the equitable distribution, because once the really emotionally charged issues are addressed and people understand, that they're going to be okay that way, then this part gets so much easier. And then they can look at the marital balance sheet with a fresh pair of eyes and say, oh, okay, I get it. I get this column. The other side gets this column. And, if we do it that way, it comes out that I get X percent of the marital estate. But if they transfer a certain amount of money or assets from a certain account to me, it'll balance it out. Or, maybe there are some bad conduct issues, and maybe I have an argument to get more than 50% of all that there is. And, there's also the idea of, a lot of times people don't realize that when they're borrowing money to pay lawyers, or they are running up credit card debt because now they're suddenly trying to support 2 households on the incomes that used to maintain 1 household, that is all part of the marital estate, and that also goes on the balance sheet. And so if you are going to keep responsibility for paying off some of the credit card debt, it's going to be offset by some of the assets, so that what you each walk away with at the end, the bottom line, is fair.
Yeah. I think it's just important to note, Tracy and I, double Tracy's, both practice in Georgia. And in Georgia, we use a current marital value the day that you're looking at settling your case, you're standing in court. There are some states that actually divide on the date of separation, and that's a more important date to them. If you're using Detour, you can pick either date, and so that's an option that you can turn off and on. I think if you were using a date of separation, it may actually be easier because it's in the past. Everybody can look up the value on that date, and usually that's a little bit better than continuing to update. Not that there's a good or bad way to do it, but the way that we do it in Georgia with getting those current values does require current updating information to make sure that we have the best numbers at all times when we're talking about resolving the case. And so what you don't want to be doing is, your attorney got a settlement offer and you're having to send them a screenshot of your over email, and all these different things. So there's definitely better ways to go about it. Tracy, what would you say is your top tip for people who are listening regarding the marital balance sheet?
I guess be clear about what you're putting on it. So I've had times where people will fill in the information, say on the net worth statement portion of their financial affidavit, and they'll be like, so-and-so's grandma's account, or, they'll have their own pet names for things.
Yes.
And then I'll see what the other side is calling it, and we'll be, not sure if we're talking about the same item. So, I usually include the bank name, type of account, is it a Bank of America checking account or whatever, and the last 4 digits of each account number. And so with that, because sometimes there are multiple account numbers from the same bank that are similar types of accounts, so if you include the last 4 digits, that's a statutory thing here in Georgia too, is that you don't include the whole account number and anything you put in the court record to protect your privacy, but those last 4 digits can be really helpful in making sure that everybody's talking about the same accounts and that there's clarity, and if you agree who's getting what, you're all on the same page of which accounts you're actually keeping.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I actually had a case get really almost contested over that exact thing, because the one party kept saying joint checking without identifying the numbers. The other attorney was like, my client doesn't have access to this account. And the client was describing how it was used, not how it was actually titled at the bank. And it was just causing a lot of confusion until we sorted out, let's just go by the numbers, and it's not really joint, and these different things. So just be factual. Just be, Bank of America 1, 2, 3, 4 checking in both names, whatever it is, really helps us get to the heart of the matter.
I would say with retirement too,
to
be clear about that, because for most people, they don't really think much about, they've got an IRA. Well, is it a traditional IRA? Is it a Roth IRA? Those have different tax implications too. So just saying so-and-so's IRA doesn't help clarify and address what makes sense to divide or, things like that. So whatever detail you have for that, it doesn't have to be, a 50-character description. Enough that everybody understands this is the type of asset we're dealing with. And that's why discovery is not fun, but it's important. And you were saying also about how even in Detour Life, it'll pull up the last 3 years worth of account statements, and people often wonder, well, why do we need to do that? The marital balance sheet is going to include typically the most current values, but if there's any question about why those values have changed over time, somebody says, I thought this account had $50,000 in it. Why is it down to $2,000? Well, you can look through the statements and see, that was used to pay all the household bills now that we're, in 2 households. Guess what? I once had a case where we were able to find out in some of the records that somebody was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on women on a sugar daddy website.
Oh, wonderful.
We were surprised. Thanks for the statements.
Yeah, I see a lot of crypto, day trading, different things like that these days as well. So being able to search the digital records, you can see those withdrawals. You can also see market changes. I think a lot of people don't understand how up and down and extreme the market is, especially in 2025. And so, talking about resolution on one day versus another day, you're probably dealing with widely different values. So that's another reason to understand your accounts, look at them, and then you cannot be suspicious that this dropped because of withdrawal. You could be like, no, the market went down on that day, and here's where we're at now. Tracy, I'm sure people listening will want to work with you on their divorce case. What is the best way for them to reach out to you?
They can find me and my contact information on my website at www.weissfamilylaw.com. That's WEISS familylaw.com.
And if you're listening, we'll put it in the show notes. If you're driving, you don't have to worry about missing that information. Tracy's information is also associated with her work in Divorce Amicably, and you can find that in the book as well. This was chapter 50, the marital balance sheet, so stay tuned for future chapters. And if you want to get the book, just head to Amazon.com. It's available in hardback, paperback, and Kindle version if you don't want anybody to know you're reading about how to have a good divorce. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.